All right, great. Let's 8 o'clock. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. This is my talk, Intro to Dataverse inside of Power Automate. My name is Dave Patrick. I work for a company called DSA Incorporated, www.dsainc.com for more information. You may notice that I have the CDS crossed out and the DataFlex Pro crossed out and the Microsoft Flow crossed out. That's for a reason. We'll talk about why we had to update some of the terms and technologies thanks to our good friends at Microsoft. But first, let me go over what the takeaways are for this talk. So really four big takeaways in these 10 minutes is I want you to understand what is Dataverse, how you would use it with something like Flow in Power Automate to move data, say, from one source to another, maybe from Dataverse to SharePoint, and finally, how to get to it from Power BI. People are always asking, hey, I want to report on this Dataverse. Can I use Power BI? Absolutely, we're going to show you that first off. So, it used to be called Common Data Service, and I mention this because there's still some references to that. Anytime you're deep into some of the bowels of Dataverse, you might see CDS or Common Data Service. So just be aware that it was known as Common Data Service for a long time. For a split second, Microsoft renamed it to DataFlex Pro, which is what we see down here, but there was a copyright thing, so that kind of quickly got changed. And now it's all Dataverse, and the URL is up to date, and now it's, they're trying to update just about everywhere to call it Dataverse, so be aware of that. It is part of the Microsoft Power Platform, so Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, they all work very well. They're integrated with Dataverse. There are lots of different data connectors out there. You can use the AI builder with it. There's the Power Virtual Agents that you can use with it. So Office 365, Dynamics 365, your own standalone applications, they're all part and parcel. They work very easily, as you'll see with Dataverse. It's part of the, plugged right into that universe. So what is Microsoft Dataverse? It is, as they note here, it used to be called Common Data Service. It lets you securely store and manage your data in a set of tables in the cloud is really what it is. And if you're not familiar with, hopefully everyone's familiar with the table, but set of rows and columns. A lot of folks that I work with are not database professionals, but they do use Excel. So I'll tell them it's like Excel spreadsheets. If each spreadsheet is think of it as a table. They used to be called entities, which, I'm an old school database guy, DBA for 10 years. I like entities and attributes, but Microsoft thought that those terms were kind of older or not as easily understood. So they changed them to tables and rows and columns, and that seems to be more user friendly. I should mention that the source of this particular data here is Microsoft Learn. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft Learn, check it out. It is really, it's way more than documentation in web-based documentation. It is tutorials, sandboxes, hands-on labs, exam prep. Microsoft just had their Microsoft Build conference, and they had all these cloud challenges where if you completed the cloud challenge, you would get a discount on a Microsoft exam. It was all hosted through Microsoft Learn. So definitely check out the Microsoft Learn website. It's what I use for all of sourcing sort of where to get started with some of this stuff. This is where you can find Dataverse. There's a couple different ways you can access it, and I'll show you in my demo how you can access it. But once you get into either Power Apps or Flow, you click on Data on the left-hand side here, and that's where you'll have access to tables and option sets, and these are some of the old terms. So that's going to say tables now if you go to it today, and columns and things like that. Once you get into Dataverse, you'll see some of the tables that are available. There's standard tables. You can see here there's a bunch of ones that are marked standard, and then you can have your own custom tables. So things like a customer, an account, an activity, sort of standard tables that any business would use are already created there and available for you in Dataverse. When you click into the ribbon here, you can do things like export that data, analyze it in Power BI. I mentioned, hey, one of the things I keep getting asked is, how do I look at this data in Power BI? Well, it's right there. Click on Data, Analyze in Power BI. That's going to download a Power BI data connection file that's going to open up, be connected to Dataverse. You'll authenticate, then you can start clicking those tables and accessing that data, loading it into your Power BI, and start reporting on it right away. Couldn't be easier. It's all cloud-based. You can do this on a Mac. You can do this on your Windows machine, your Linux box. It's all browser-based, and a lot of my users are, really no-code, low-code. They're really excited by the ease of getting to this data and running these reports. What else? So now here in Dataverse, I mean, again, through the entities or the tables tab, I'm showing you some of the fields that you can have on each entity. So this one has the account name, which we've marked as the primary field. What we're seeing here is that there's not only the data, which is up in this tab here that you can access, you can actually look at the actual data, but you can also look at the metadata. That's the data about the data. Things like what type of, is it required? Is it optional? Is it text? Is it not numeric? So a lot of different it's not just the metadata, but also the actual data all in one environment. And this is the actual data where you can actually go through and enter different account names. So why would you want to do this? As I mentioned, easy to manage, easy to secure, access all your data, rich metadata. You can do logic, validation, productivity tools. There's even an add-in for Excel to talk to Dataverse. So a lot of really cool features in the Dataverse world. So let's look at how we would use this using something like a flow in SharePoint. What you can do is there's these connectors in Dataverse, or excuse me, in Power Automate when you create a flow, and they talk to Dataverse. So you can do things like the CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. You can set a trigger that when a record is created or updated or deleted or even read, selected, you can then trigger off of that action and then do or trigger off that trigger and then do some action. So let me show you that. Let's jump over here into our Dataverse world here. And this is Microsoft Flow, and under the Data tab, I click on Tables. That's going to take me to Dataverse. Now, notice up in the URL, it actually changes the Power Apps. Flow, Power Apps, they're all integrated. They work, hand in hand. So when I click on that, it switches to Power Apps. But I started off in Flow just to show you that it really doesn't matter which one you start off in. Once I'm in here, I can be into my account entity or table. And then I can click on things like the data tab and actually see that data. Now, what I've set up here is I went to my flows and I said, hey, I want to create a new flow in Power Automate so that whenever someone enters a new, in this case, account, I want to show it up in SharePoint. So because maybe not everyone has access to Dataverse or Dynamics. And so what I did is I came in here. Now I did change this. I did this in my development environment. There's this concept of the production environment, default environments, and in my case, my development environment. So one of the tips and tricks is to make sure you're in the right environment when you're working with Dataverse. So I switched to my development environment. I click on flows. And from there, I can see that I've created these flows that will move data when a row is modified, added, or deleted from my accounts table. So I can click here to edit. Here's another tip or trick. There's two edits in Flow. There's one over here that edits the properties like the name and things like that of my flow. I can click on the edit in the upper corner and that actually edits the flow itself. So don't get those two confused. Some people will be like, I clicked on edit, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Yeah, there's two edits. So this is the flow that I created. And you can see the way the flows work is you just fill in the information. This is going to be triggered when I create from the accounts table for my whole organization. And once this triggers, what's it going to do? It's going to create a new record in the SharePoint accounts site. In the new accounts list, it's going to copy the account name and the main phone into the title and phone number in that SharePoint field. So once this is saved, I can run it. There's a little flow checker to check for errors. There's a little test to set this up and say I'm ready to test it. And what I do is in Power Automate, I go into Dataverse and I add a new record. That should trigger a new row into SharePoint if the flow runs correctly. So literally I go in here into my data, I click on accounts, I add a new record, and then the flow will run and trigger that flow. So let's do that. We'll come here, we add a record, and we'll just call this something like ZZZ, and then we'll add the, we should see the flow run. And while that's doing that, I'm going to pull up the source or the destination. So this is you can see I've done some in the past. I've added ABC, XYZ, and every time I add one in Dataverse, the flow runs and copies it out to SharePoint. So the idea is that as you add each one of these, the flow is going to run it. And let's actually take a look at the flows so that I've ran previously, just to give you an idea of what the result of a successful flow would look like. So in here, you can see I've got some of these flows, and let me switch to my development environment because that's the one I've been working with. Let's go to my flows. And we'll see that there is these existing flows that I've run. Down here, yeah, you can see the ones that I've run that have succeeded in tests, and you can actually click on those results and see, what the inputs were, what the outputs were. There's actually JavaScript object notation that represents some of the data that goes across. And again, I showed you an existing one. If I had wanted to create a new one, I could click on flow and just said create new cloud flow. So let's do that real fast. We'll come over here and you just say new flow, automated cloud flow. There's other types, but this one, this was my demo. I came in here and I typed Dataverse and I picked the, trigger. I said create, and then I just filled in, what is it? Is it the create? Which table? Which the scope, and finally where it was all going to. So that is data flow and Dataverse in a nutshell. You can do this yourself by signing up for the Power Apps Community Plan. It's a free plan. It gives you free individual use, great for learning, great for training, great for exam prep. Includes a lot of other access to Power Apps, Flow, other tools. I mentioned some of the tips and tricks to watch out for. You can also join the Microsoft 365 Developer Plan. That's another free plan that every 90 days will renew automatically as long as you're using it, and that'll give you your own Office 365 tenant to work with Dataverse. Thanks. I hope you got a little bit out of this. If you have questions, tweet me on Twitter at David E. Patrick.